In this Sikha, the Rebbe is going to be contrasting a Rambam and the Alter Rebbe in regards to halacha that we learn out from this week's Parsha. The Rambam says towards the end of Hilchos Chirus that a person, a worker, is not allowed to be doing his own work at night and then hiring himself out the next day. Because that would be considered gezel malachta shel balabais. He's stealing from the work of his employer because he's getting weak and he won't be able to do his work with the proper energy. The Rambam then goes on in a second halacha, and it's important to mention that this is a separate halacha. The Rambam goes on and says that just like the owner, the employer, is not allowed to steal from his employee to not pay him or not pay him in time, so too the employee is not allowed to steal from the work of his balabais, to waste time here, waste time there. He has to be very careful with all of his time. He also has to work with all of his koyach, with all of his might and energy, because Yaakov HaTzadik says, he says this too, Rachel and Leah, he says, with all of my might I worked for your father. And the Rambam concludes, and that's why he got his payment also in this world, as the Pasuk says, he became very, very wealthy. Now the Alter Rebbe also brings all of these ideas, but he brings it in a different order, and he brings it all in one seif rather than the way the Rambam puts it in two separate seifim. The Alter Rebbe starts off by saying that just like the employer is not supposed to cheat the employee and to steal from him, so too the worker is not allowed to steal from his boss. He's not allowed to waste his time. He has to be careful with his time. He also has to work with all of his energy, and he brings this idea from Yaakov Avinu. And only then does the Alter Rebbe bring the point that the Rambam actually brought first, that this is why the worker is not allowed to work the night before and then hire himself out the next day, because he will make himself weak and he won't be able to do his work for his employer properly. So in other words, by the Rambam, this idea of the worker not hiring himself out, not working the night before, is brought before the whole concept of having to do all of your work with all of your energy, and thereby not stealing from the work of your balabayas. By the Alter Rebbe, it's brought only at the end. After the Alter Rebbe said already that you're not supposed to waste your time, and you have to work with all of your energy. And about Yaakov, this is when the Alter Rebbe says, that's why you're not allowed to work the night before and make yourself weak, etc. Says the Rebbe, the simple difference we would say between the Rambam and the Alter Rebbe is the Alter Rebbe, as we know, is trying to explain the reasons and the definition of the halachos. So he starts off first with the general idea that you're not supposed to be neglecting the work of the balabayas. And from there he goes to the details. First of all, what's relevant to the time of work itself, not to waste time, and to do it with all of your energy. And then he moves on to the idea, which is sort of more on the outside. As a result of that, you also shouldn't be doing work the night before, and thereby making yourself weak for the next day. Whereas according to the Rambam, what the Rambam is interested in mainly is the bottom line halacha, and therefore the Rambam is just going according to the order. He first starts off with the isur that happens even before you started working, the night before, and then he starts dealing with how you have to be careful while you're doing your work to make sure to do the work with all of your energy, etc. But the Rebbe says this is not really enough of an explanation. Because from the fact that the Rambam again puts this in two separate halachas, and he starts the second halacha by saying that the employee is not allowed to steal from the work of the balabayas, even though he technically said this already in the previous halacha when he spoke about not working the night before. And now the Rambam is repeating this idea again when he's speaking about this idea that you need to be putting in all of your energy into your work. So it seems to be the Rambam is telling us there are two different halachas, two different gedorim, two different isurim going on with two different definitions. So again, according to the Alter Rebbe, it would seem to be that it's all part of one thing. The Alter Rebbe starts off by saying you have to work with all of your energy, and then he says, and therefore, you shouldn't be hiring yourself out the night before. So in other words, the fact that you shouldn't be hiring yourself out the night before is as a result of the fact that you need to be putting in all of your energy into your work. But according to the Rambam, again, the Rambam put in this idea of not working the night before he spoke about the idea of putting in all of your koyach, all of your energy like Yaakov Avinu. So therefore it seems to be that this is a separate isur of not working the night before, which is not to do with the idea of not having all of my koyach, all of my energy the next day. Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand this by looking a little bit more carefully first at the words of the Rambam itself. The Rambam says you have to work with all of your koyach, because Yaakov HaTzadik says, with all of my koyach I worked for your father, and that's why he got his payment also in this world. And the Rebbe has a number of questions. Number one, we know the Rambam is a sefer halacha. Why is it relevant to discuss the special reward that Yaakov got? Number two, seemingly the Rambam is trying to prove that it's an obligation that you need to work with all of your might, with all of your energy. But by saying that Yaakov got a special reward for this, seemingly that's removing the proof. It sounds like it's not an obligation. Yaakov did something special, and that's why he got special reward. Another question, why does the Rambam use the word shaharei? Because, or since Yaakov Avinu said, b'chol koichi, etc., why doesn't he just say shenemar, as is the usual case? And finally, why does the Rambam use this term Yaakov HaTzadik? Bit of an unusual expression. Why not Yaakov Avinu? By saying Yaakov HaTzadik, it almost again emphasizes that this is a special righteousness of Yaakov Avinu. It's going beyond the letter of the law, perhaps. It's not an absolute obligation. And we're trying to learn from here that it is an obligation. Says the Rebbe. The Rambam starts off, again, that second halacha by saying that you're not supposed to steal from the work of the employer, and wasting the time of your work. And then the Rambam continues, and so too you have to work with all of your koyach, with all of your might, with all of your energy. So one may have thought that this idea that you need to work with all of your effort, that's not to do with the idea that you shouldn't be stealing from the work of your boss. You shouldn't be stealing the work of your boss, that's that you shouldn't be wasting time and things like that. But the fact that you have to put in all of your energy, that's something more of a matter of your own personal level of integrity, your own personal level of faithfulness, honesty, maybe between you and Hashem. In other words, you're not necessarily impacting the work itself if you're not putting in all of your energy. You did the job, you got the job done, and who cares if you didn't put in every ounce of your energy? And this is what the Rambam is coming to bring a proof from Yaakov. That the truth of the matter is that the working with all of your might is relevant, and it's connected to the work itself also, and to your employer as well. Not only between you and Hashem, we're saying I didn't put in, every last drop of my energy. What's the Rambam proving from Yaakov Avinu? It's not from the fact that he says I worked with all of my koyach. And that's actually why it doesn't say shenemar, because the shenemar would be on the fact that Yaakov said I worked with all my koyach, but that's not the point. That it's part of it. The main thing is actually from the continuation, the fact that Yaakov got the reward, the payment in this world, which we asked before, why is that relevant? It's very relevant. We're not speaking about a special reward that Hashem gave him because he acted in an extra righteous way. What we're saying is, this is why he got the payment for his work in this world. That means it's the payment, it's the result of his physical work in this world. In other words, it is considered the payment for what he had done. In other words, saying that what we're saying is it's not that when he worked with all of his might, it's just a special righteousness, a special thing that he did between him and Hashem. It's part of his obligation to his employer, and for that he's actually going to see the fruits of his labor in the work that he did. And the Rebbe says that's actually why the Rambam calls him Yaakov HaTzadik. Different to what we thought before, Tzaddik means someone that's actually in an extra special way. According to the Rambam, we see in Hilchas Deis, a tzaddik, according to the Rambam, is not someone that's acting beyond the letter of the law. That would be called a chosid. A tzaddik by the Rambam means someone that's acting the way he's supposed to be acting, according to what's obligated. And that's what the Rambam is trying to tell us, that this is something that's demanded, that's really expected of every single one of us. Says the Rebbe, this idea itself, that the obligation of the employee to work with all of his energy, with all of his might, and that we said it's not just connected with his level of integrity per se, but rather it's connected directly with the work that he's doing for his boss. This itself could now be learned in two different ways. One is going to be the Rambam, and the other is going to be the Alter Rebbe. According to the Rambam, the obligation to work, just having the right amount of strength and energy that you need to get the job done, which is really the first halach of the Rambam, where he speaks about not working the night before. That's what we call, that's the definition, you need that for the work to be even be able to be considered a proper job. If you didn't have the energy to do your work, then the job is not even done. It's considered that the work wasn't done. And that's what the Rambam is speaking about in his first halacha. In his next halacha, he is coming to add a new idea. That it's not only about having the koyach, the energy to do that job, but you need to work with all of your koyach, with all of your effort, with all of your energy. But that's not to make the job be considered a job, but that's as your obligation to your employer. The Rebbe brings the idea that an employee is considered that his body is as if koni, it's as if acquired to the boss. And the difference obviously will be, for example, let's say a person could say, look, I got the job done. I had enough energy, the amount of effort, the amount of energy I needed to get the job done, so I did it. I didn't need to use all of my energy. The second halacha is coming to teach you and teaching you from Yaakov that no, you need to work with all of your koyach. That's the Rambam. But the Alter Rebbe brings both of these ideas together. Because according to the Alter Rebbe, even the idea of working, putting in the right amount of energy that you need for your job, not only working with all of your energy, but even just putting in the regular amount of work to get the job done, is all part of your obligation to the Balabais. It's all, in other words, this second point that it's as if your body is given over to the Balabais. And therefore, the Alter Rebbe brings this idea that you shouldn't hire yourself out. Again, the Rambam brought that first. But the Alter Rebbe, it's coming as a continuation to the idea of not wasting and not being mevatel the malach of the balabais, and you have to be careful with your time, meaning to say that both the work generally as well as the idea of working with all of your energy are both as a result of this one idea that you're given over to the employer. The Rebbe moves on from here to explain a number of different diyukim, a number of different ideas that we can now also see in the differences between the words of the Alter Rebbe and the Rambam based on this idea. But the Rebbe now moves on to the Hoirah. And the Rebbe says, we know that Yidden we're considered poyalim, working for Hashem, making the world a dira b'tachtonim for Hashem. Why are we learning out specifically to do it with all of our koyach, from Yaakov Avinu as he's working by Lavan and Charan? Because the work that we're doing, so to speak, for Hashem is similar to the avodah of Yaakov. You have Yaakov when he's working for Lavan. You have Yaakov when he was learning in the yeshiva of Shem and Aver. But when he's working for Lavan, he's not working in the world of Kedusha. He's working with the physicality and the mundane aspects of the world to make the world a place for Hashem. And that's what the Hoirah is, that this avodah has to be done with all of our might, with all of our energy. Not only with our actions, but with all of our faculties. Even though you might say for the job itself, I could do it as long as I'm doing it with koyach, I'm doing it with the right energy that I need to do it, that would be good enough, seemingly. Well, that's true, perhaps as far as the work itself is concerned. But in this sikha, we were speaking about the idea that there's also the concept that you're working for someone, for there's a balabayas. And for that, you need to be putting in all of your energy. And therefore, when we're doing this avodah for Hashem, the avodah of Dira Le'izbar B'tachtonim, it's not enough just to get involved with our lowest faculty of action, which may be just enough to get the job done, but we need to be doing, because we're working for Hashem, the Balabayas, we need to be putting in kol koichai, every drop of our energy.